Your Steve Jones Show podcast is loading now. The Steve Jones Show podcast is sponsored by Sunbury Motors, North 4th Street in Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. Sports talk where your voice counts. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. Now from the Sunbury Motors Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Steve gets some well-deserved downtime this week, so it's time to hit the rewind button, play back some of the great interviews we've had earlier this year on the show. And we're in the Sunbury Motors Studio. Sean Carey here, Sunbury Motors, Ford, Lincoln, Hyundai, in the North 4th Street Auto Plaza, Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia. On the Strip, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. All-Star game tonight, Washington, D.C., Scherzer versus Sale, your starting pitchers. See if we can get some good AL versus NL offense-defensive matchups first couple of innings before the managers begin all that substituting. So hopefully a fun one tonight. That was fun last night watching the home run derby. Bryce Harper with the home field advantage. But how about Rhys Hoskins, the Philadelphia Phillies, making a name for himself, knocking out the number one seed in the opening round, but then losing by one in the semifinals to Kyle Schwarber, who eventually then lost to Bryce Harper. So Phillies off till Friday. They'll start a weekend series with San Diego. Friday night, 6:30 will be the pregame for On Deck on News Radio 1070 WKOK. And I would think between now and then, and actually we may even know tomorrow, where Orioles outfielder Manny Machado is going to go. Trade buzz at an all-time high. Teams that have been in the mix, not only the Phillies, but Milwaukee, Arizona, and the team that's now in the forefront is the Los Angeles Dodgers. We hear that Baltimore does have a plan and a parameters of a deal in place, but we'll find out if it goes to the Dodgers tomorrow, and they have been in need of a shortstop since Corey Seager went down to Tommy John surgery. But for sure, Manny Machado very clearly looks like he's played his last game in Baltimore. So barring a last-minute snag, that deal could happen tomorrow. That'll make a lot of waves because what is tomorrow? There's no games tomorrow. No nothing tomorrow other than the ESPYs tomorrow night. You going to watch that? Manny Machado in the midst of a career year, batting .315, 24 home runs in 96 games, and also has returned to his original position of shortstop this season. We will have some more Major League Baseball talk later in the hour. R.J. Anderson, baseball writer from CBSSports.com, will join us, and we have great replays throughout the week. The legendary Spider Caldwell, Penn State football equipment guy for 3+ decades. When we first started the podcast last year on iTunes and Google Play, one of the most listened to shows of the entire year was last August when we had Spider Caldwell on the show. So we're going to dedicate hour number 2 of tomorrow's show to Spider Caldwell. Some great stories Spider has about Joe. Times on the road, going to away games. Shares a real good one, too, when Penn State played down in Washington, D.C. Against Indiana. Remember that one when Indiana was actually deemed the home team back in late 2010? So we'll get that story and much more from Spider. And also, Spider was with us back in late September. Remember when Penn State wore the throwback jerseys for the Indiana game? Late September of last year, we had a chance to talk to Spider about that as well, since he played a very pivotal role as to what the uniforms looked like for that specific home game last September at Beaver Stadium. So that going on and many more terrific replays as we roll through the week. Best of week here on News Radio 1070 WKOK. We do have some Penn State football news to share. Head football coach James Franklin and seniors Trace McSorley, Amani Ariore, and Nick Scott. They're going to be representing the Nittany Lions at the 47th annual Big Ten kickoff in Chicago. Penn State will have their portion of Big Ten Media Day on Monday, and then the 47th annual Big Ten kickoff luncheon. That'll happen next Tuesday, the 24th, and you'll be able to watch a good portion of that on BTN. Dave Rebson will be the MC of that event. Also, Penn State running back, a former Penn State running back, and One of Saquon Barkley's buds in the weight room, Andre Robinson, Bishop McDevitt product out of Harrisburg. He announced his transfer following the 2017 season. We have learned today that Anderson has officially transferred to the University of Delaware. He is eligible to play later this season. And that gives us a perfect little segue into more outstanding college football talk, and he has been one of the best in the business for decades. Mr. College Football joins us, Tony Barnhart.
There are certain people in a profession that set themselves apart from others, and over the years, our next guest has done exactly that. He's with SEC Network now and TMGSports.com. That is Tony Barnhart. Tony, welcome, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Steve. That's very kind of you to say that. Obviously, I followed your career these many, many years, and anybody who's done 200 or more games at a place like Penn State is worth noting. So congratulations to you.
Oh, thank you, Tony. Very nice of you to say. The transfer rule, the SEC just went through a series of meetings. And, of course, Nick Saban is going to be a focal point of, when it comes time for people to talk, and he always has opinions on how it works out. Discuss the transfer rule and how the SEC eventually changed it.
Well, Steve, everybody understands that the graduate transfer rule was basically put into place. If you get your graduate degree and you still got eligibility left, you can transfer just about any place you want to and become immediately eligible. Well, the SEC coaches and administrators put a wrinkle into that, and they said, look, if you're going to transfer within the conference, from one conference school to another, we're going to still make you do a one-year residency requirement. And then there had been, a couple of guys that had come up who wanted to transfer, and one was a defensive back by the name of Maurice Smith who wanted to transfer from Alabama to Georgia, and it took a while, and finally he did get a waiver from the SEC. But the bottom line was everybody understood that we're sort of in a new age now of college athletics where you're trying, if you can, to give the athletes more freedom. So ultimately, after much discussion last Friday, the presidents of the SEC voted to do away with that residency requirement. And now, if you graduate and you have eligibility left, you can go to another SEC school without sitting out. But that was the change.
In an odd way, isn't this something that actually can benefit Nick Saban?
Oh, there's no doubt. See, that's the amazing thing, Steve, or the funny thing about it is, Nick Saban was being set up as this guy who was against it when, as a matter of fact, he's going to benefit from it more than anybody else. His position, when we got there last Tuesday in Destin for the meetings, he said, look, I don't know why I'm getting beat up for this. All I'm doing is following the rules. Either we have a rule or we don't have a rule. We have a rule and we enforce the rule, then I shouldn't be getting beat up. And what I wrote at the time was he's right about this, and they should do away with the rule. But if a guy is looking to play his last year and maybe not particularly happy with the way things are going at his school in the SEC, Alabama's a place he might want to go. So ultimately, you're right. I think Nick Saban will benefit from this change more than anybody.
Yeah, you and I both know it's not like college basketball. College basketball right now has about 700 to 850 transfers per year. Some of them are grad transfers, some are just straight transfers. Is there a concern on the part of some coaches that they're trying to avoid potentially the Wild West?
Well, obviously coaches are the ones who are not crazy about it, who think it's going to be out of control. I don't think it will be. I think that's overstated. Now, I will say this: there are certainly more graduate transfers now than there were 5 years ago, when it was just one or two guys who were doing this. Now, guys are going into school. If you go to summer school, you can get out in 3.5 years, and so I just don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. There'll be some high profile players who will leave, but on the balance, I don't think it's that big a deal.
Tony, the Rice Commission just put out its recommendations, which you and I both know the NCAA will adopt on the college basketball side. If I were to sit you down in a chair and say, hey, look, let's look at college football. You've been around the block. You know how it works. What would be a couple of recommendations you would like to make to a committee right away about college football and maybe some changes it needs?
Well, I think one of the things that we're going to have to face eventually is that the players are going to have to be compensated for their names and images and likenesses. We're not in a situation right now where, they've done the full cost of attendance stipend, which gives guys about between $4,000 to $6,000. And now, really, the only thing that remains, I think, is to give them a chance to benefit from their name, images, and likenesses, because you're not going to be able to pay the players. That simply is not going to happen. I think the other thing is we need to continue to make the changes necessary when it comes to the safety of the game. I think we're at a crucial point right now where we've got to listen to the experts. We've got to do everything we can to make the game as safe as we possibly can, because I've talked to a number of commissioners who say, there's going to be a big, big lawsuit over this someday, and we better be able to go into a court of law and say that we have done every single thing we can to make the game as safe as possible. It's just like the new kickoff rule where you can
right.
take a knee inside the 25-yard line and get the ball at the 25. That's all about the safety of the game.
And you know how I looked at that, Tony, is that, if you can fair catch it, and you and I both know, you put a guy back. Saquon Barkley was back for Penn State last year. You really think he was going to fair catch the ball?
Not a chance.
Yeah, exactly right. Not a chance. To me, that was just a step to keep it in there, but I'm wondering if it's the first step toward eliminating it. What do you think?
Well, I think I think we'll eventually eliminate kickoff. I don't know that you and I will still be around when they do it, but this was something they could do short of eliminating the kickoff, because that way you can still have the onside kick and it's still a part of the game. But what you don't want is one team that's vastly superior to another from an athlete standpoint, and a young man catches the ball at 3 and he's got to run it, okay? Right. And maybe he doesn't want to run it, and maybe his coach doesn't want him to run it. So what that does is that it's going to increase the number of touchbacks, which is the objective to begin with, but still it gives the Saquon Barkleys of the world a chance to make a play.
You were talking about compensating athletes for their likeness, image, and so forth, which would be anything from the EA Sports game to a commercial for a car dealership, for example. In reality, outside the EA Sports game, where obviously every image is in there, I mean, how many players really would benefit from that overall, but at least have the option of having the benefits so the university doesn't have to pay them?
Very, very few players. Very few players from a free market standpoint are going to get that kind of money. But the idea is, again, to give the players more freedom. Okay, what I wrote last week, I said you can't give them more money, but you can give them more freedom. And I think athletics, college athletics, has got to find a way to do that. And again, you're only talking about a handful of people, and certainly, some of the outstanding female athletes, volleyball players, golfers, they'll get some opportunities, but at least it puts it back into the free market as opposed to an NCAA policy.
Completely agree with that. And the next part is, what about the ability to have, okay, let's use semantics here. Instead of an agent, we call them advisors. Hockey players and baseball players have advisors. Should college football and basketball players be allowed that same opportunity?
Absolutely, and they should. And the hope is if you bring the whole agent thing out of the shadows, and there have been efforts to try to do that to a certain extent, because a lot of coaches will let players meet with agents, and that idea is hopefully you get fewer players making bad decisions. Whatever the number was this year of juniors that came out and simply did not get drafted. That to me is something that's something we need to come up with. Even maybe finding a way for them to come back. How do you do that and take care of all your scholarships? But that's something I think we've got to address.
Next part is this. You and I both know there are several players that went into the NFL draft, and we're about to see this in the NBA draft too, where they're not going to get picked. Yep. Should they be given the option of going back to school? And how complicated does that become with rosters that right now are set at 85? Well,
and that's the thing. It's all about the numbers. If you're Nick Saban, you're Alabama. You've got to sign 21, 22 players to get the numbers that you want. And I still think it can be done simply because you're not going to hold 10 spots. We know that, okay?
Right.
But you could hold 3, okay? Maybe you put a limit on the number of spots you can hold open for guys who could come back. But to me, I know it's about the numbers, but we've got to find a way to help these young men. I just think about some of the young men who went out and just simply did not get drafted. What's next for them? If they could come back and play again, maybe get closer to their degree, I think life would be a lot better for them. And I just got to believe there's a lot of smart people in college athletics, and we can find a way to accommodate these guys.
I completely agree with that. LSU's number 1 in this grouping since 2013. I think 32 or 33 LSU players have come out. Not all of them, Tony, have been drafted. And again, that puts them into no man's land.
Yeah, but where are you going to go? You could go back to school and get your degree, maybe. But the problem is your playing days are over. And if you would come back, the thing that drives me absolutely crazy, who's guys who come out and basically the NFL gets potentially first-round material for second-round money, second and third-round money. Right. And if you could find a way to make it, give these guys, make more sense to stay in the school and get insurance, come back and try to go from being a third-round pick to maybe a second-round pick or even a low first-round pick. To me, that is time well invested.
Something that I'm in favor of is that it's at some point in January, and that would be before the late signing period. If you wanted to clear for the draft, I'd like to see an underclassmen combine to maybe get them even better advice as to what to do and not do. What do you think of that idea, Tony? I've
heard that talk, and I really like that idea, simply because that way they have a chance to hear from the pro scouts. I mean, the problem is, the NFL has a system now. They tell you you're going to be a first-round pick or second-round pick or other, all right? And if you're an other, you shouldn't go out. But the kids won't listen. They're listening to other people. They're listening to agents. They're listening to family members who want the money, and they want it now. And so, to me, if they had either a junior combine or an undergrad combine, then the NFL scouts, and I do a lot of pro days, and I know these guys. The scouts in the NFL are really sharp, and they would tell them right up, son, you are not ready. I'm telling you. And that comes directly from the club, and I think it would benefit them greatly.
Tony, on a personal note, what was it many, many years ago that said, you know what, I really want to do this, and how much have you been helped over the years by the fact that you have what I call a curious mind? You want to always know more about something.
Steve, when I started college, I thought I was going to be a high school football coach. That was my plan. I was a player. I wasn't very good. I was small, but I compensated by being exceedingly slow. But I was going to be a high school teacher and a coach. And then I had a change of heart. I saw what the salary chart was for first year high school teachers in the state of Georgia, and of course I entered the profession one profession that pays less as a sports writer.
Yes.
I fell in love with the sport early on. When I was a young boy, I was really a Yankees fan more than anything else, but I went to my first college football game when I was about 13 and just thought it was the neatest thing in the world. So I decided I would give writing a shot and got a job at a small newspaper in South Carolina. I graduated on June 10th from the University of Georgia, and then went to work at the Union Daily Times on June 11th, and I've been drawing a paycheck ever since. And it's like my wife said. She said, it's not like you got a real job or anything like that. So just you're just having fun. You're talking about playing ball.
Well, I'll believe it. My wife says the same thing to me. And I'll say to her when I leave for the stadium on Saturday morning, I'll say, well, it's off to the mine. Just to make her think in some way I'm actually working. What has it taken to – it's one thing to be a sports writer, be out there, you write, you're on deadline, you write your column and so forth. What has it taken for you to adapt now to the multimedia world that we have now?
Well, it became pretty early on, right around 84, 85, when I came to Atlanta, to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, that the future was going to be for those who had multiple sets of skills, who could do a lot of different things, who didn't rely on one thing. And that's when I started getting into radio and television, and I got a big break in 97 when this is early in the days of ESPN's College Game Day, and they said we need a reporter with the guys, and so they hired me as a reporter. And I was still doing my job with the AJC, but that gave me incredible exposure on the television, and that turned into about an 8-year stint with CBS, and then the SEC network came along, and that was something I couldn't turn down. But it's and I tell this to journalism students when I speak to them. I said, man, you got to use all the sets of muscles you've got creatively. You got to be able to write. You got to be able to speak. You need to be able to do stuff on television. And I think the future is for the multi-purpose folks.
Totally agree. Tony, an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for your time. Always appreciate and respect your work tremendously.
All right, Steve. Good luck.
When it comes to car buying, there's the other guy's way, and then there's the SMC way. The other guys force you into a vehicle you really don't want. The Sunbury Motors way lets you take the time you need to browse, ask questions, and take the test drive and think on it. For over 100 years, the Mertz family and all their employees have made your experience the most pleasant one you'll ever have. The other guys won't offer you the best price for your trade, no matter how much they say they will. The SMC way is their promise to provide you with the most money the market shows your vehicle is worth. The SMC way is to offer you all applicable factory rebates on new vehicles and generous discounts. Looking for a pre-owned vehicle? The SMC way checks each vehicle in a 200-mile radius to determine the lowest price, then beat it. It's the lowest price promise, just part of the SMC way. The choice is up to you, the other guy's way or the SMC way. The SMC way wins every time. Sunbury Motors Company in the North 4th Street Auto Plaza, Sunbury, and at sunburymotors.com. Selling more cars and satisfying more customers for over 100 years.
Taking your calls at 800-795-9565. This is The Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. Now, from the Sunbury Motors Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Sunbury Motors, Ford, Lincoln, Hyundai, North 4th Street Auto Plaza, Sunbury, Sunbury Motors, Kia on the Strip in Hummel's Wharf. Steve kicking back this weekend, so we go back, replay some great interviews. Sean Carey here will take care of that as Steve enjoys time off, and we'll make sure he's back in the studio next Monday. Also, a great time for you to subscribe to our Steve Jones Show podcast this week if you haven't done that yet. Get the shows pushed right to your smartphone or tablet when you subscribe on either iTunes, the Apple Podcast app, and Google Play. Just search Steve Jones Show. You can also find us on social media. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Twitter handle at Steve Jones PSU. And you can always contact the show with an email, stevejones@wkok.com. Well, the Orioles have a structure in place for a deal. Manny Machado working through specific aspects of a trade. May happen tomorrow. To wait and see. Machado preparing for tonight's All-Star game. Could be his final appearance in a Baltimore uniform. Not yet known what team Machado is going to be traded to. The Dodgers and the Phillies, they have been invested in pursuit of the All-Star shortstop. Various sources, including Bob Nightingale of USA Today Sports and FanCred, reported earlier this afternoon the Dodgers emerged as the leading contender to acquire Machado, but also noted talks are fluid and identified not only the Dodgers and Phillies, but also the Brewers and Arizona Diamondbacks as contenders with an outside chance to land the four-time All-Star. Now, last night, MLB.com reported that Philadelphia was the most likely destination for Machado because of the Phillies' willingness to include pitching prospect Adonis Medina. Masson Sports was first to report on Monday that the Orioles were very close to a Machado trade. And sad news for Pittsburgh Steelers football fans. A former first-round draft pick reportedly has passed away. Gabriel Rivera, defensive tackle, passed away last night at a local hospital in Texas, the age of 57, due to complications related to a perforated bowel. Rivera Rivera, who was selected by the Steelers in the first round of the 1983 NFL Draft out of Texas Tech, had his career tragically cut short during his rookie season after he sustained a spinal cord injury in an alcohol-related car accident. He played in only 6 games, recorded 2 sacks prior to his accident that left him a paraplegic. Nicknamed Senior Sack in college because of his pass rushing ability, Rivera finished his career at Texas Tech with 321 tackles, 34 tackles for loss, 14 sacks, 11 pass deflections, and 6 fumble recoveries. Gabriel Rivera gone at the age of 57. And it looks like he's going to be gone from the Pittsburgh Steelers after this season. Le'Veon Bell turning down a 5-year, $70 million offer. According to NFL.com, one final offer was made to Bell yesterday, just hours before the 4 p.m. Eastern Time deadline for teams to negotiate a new contract with players given the franchise tag. The offer from the Steelers was worth a total of $70 million over 5 years, $14 million per season. But that sweet spot number that Le'Veon Bell wants, $17 million a year. So it looks like this is going to be the final year that Bell will play for the Pittsburgh Steelers. If he were to be franchise tagged for a 3rd consecutive year, the Steelers will be on the hook to pay him $17.5 million. I don't think that's going to happen. One thing that is going to happen for sure, Pittsburgh Steelers football again this season on 100.9 The Valley. Next Wednesday, training camp will start with all the players out in Latrobe, and then the first preseason game against the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles will happen on Thursday night, August the 9th. We'll have it for you over on 100.9 The Valley, your home for the Pittsburgh Steelers, with Bill Hillgrove, Tun Chilkin, and Craig Wolfley. Let's get back into some more Major League Baseball talk from CBSSports.com. R.J. Anderson.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, I want to start actually with the Seattle Mariners. Why have they been better since Robinson Cano left?
Yeah, it's a great point because we all kind of figured once he got hurt and then was suspended that their playoff chances would be dashed. And yet, that hasn't been the case. You know, they went 16-5 since. And it's crazy because if you look at their numbers, they've had an offense that would rank the 3rd worst in baseball since then, if you're just looking at runs per game compared to the full season numbers of everyone else. And yet their pitching staff has been outstanding, and they've only allowed about 2.8 runs per. And they've held their opponents to, I believe, 12 times now. They've held them to 2 runs or fewer, and they've won every single one of those games. So you're talking about the staff that's been very stingy with the long ball and stingy with walks, and right now teams aren't able to beat that. You know, they're not able to score enough runs, and credit to the Mariners pitching staff for not only keeping them in there, but, helping them ascend to first place.
Right, and not only into first place, they're ahead of the Houston Astros. So this is a legit first place, at least through this stage of the season, because the Astros have played well.
Yeah, I mean, the Astros are arguably the best team in the American League. If not, they're certainly in the top 3. And I don't think anyone saw any team really keeping in there quite like this with the Astros. Not even the Angels, because they had, injury concerns of their own in the rotation. But to the Mariners' credit, they're in it, and it doesn't seem like they're going to fade just yet. Although, funny things happen. At the same time, though, Wade LeBlanc is giving them an amazing performance out of a guy who no one really had on their radar. And, Marco Gonzalez looks like a smart trade acquisition from last summer. Took him a little while to find his footing, but he's been pitching excellently of late. And, there's a chance that by the time tonight's over, the Mariners have a 3-game lead in the division.
The Yankees were upset about the possibility of playing 3 games in 24 hours. That has since been resolved. The Dodgers and the Angels are going to be on Sunday Night Baseball that week. The Yankee-Toronto game will be a 1, then they play the doubleheader with Baltimore. I want to ask you about the television component. Television is important, but is there a concern among organizations and the players that sometimes it's wag the dog with TV?
Yeah, and I think in this particular case, the concerns are valid because, as you mentioned, the Yankees have a doubleheader the next day, and by virtue of being on ESPN, their game would have been moved from 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. And, let's just note the Yankees are going to be on Sunday Night Baseball in another week So they would have been on Sunday Night Baseball 2 weeks in a row, and it seemed like ESPN really wanted that game because prior to that game, they were going to air the All-Star Selection Show. So it seems like they were really using the Yankees to kind of ramp up ratings elsewhere. But I think it's definitely a concern. And, one of the things raging in pro sports right now is to talk about how sleep is very important. And in order to maximize your sleep, you kind of need, travel windows that allow you to maximize how much you can spend in your hotel room or at your house or whatever. So if you're a player, I think you have to be concerned about, are we being put out here in order to boost television ratings when, it's hurting us, it's hurting our play. And if you're one of these teams who gets chosen a lot on Sunday Night Baseball, well, you're literally having your flight plans derailed by a network. So I think that is definitely an area of concern. And, at the same time, you want that exposure. You want to help grow the game. So I don't know what the solution is there, but I'm glad that, ESPN kind of kneeled, so to speak, and that, there's a solution because it has been unfair to the Yankees and their players to ask them to play basically 3 games within 24 hours.
Look, there are 162 of these. You can make accommodations for the club once in a while.
Absolutely.
I mean,
you can argue that
you and I are in the same page.
Shorter.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the Braves because you wrote a fascinating article about the Braves, about how they made certain decisions 3-4 years ago, and those decisions are now starting to pay off. Discuss the philosophy, RJ, that went into what the Braves did, because obviously they were on top for such a long period of time, and they really hit a true rebuild. And how do you think they've handled it, and why have they handled it this way?
Yeah, so it's interesting because a few years ago, before the Braves started this rebuild, they kind of locked in a number of young players, Andrelton Simmons and Freddie Freeman and Craig Kimbrell, and it looked like they were set for the next, 3 to 5 years. And then, management changed. They went with a new general manager who happened to be their assistant general manager at the time, and all of a sudden he started trading those pieces away, except for Freeman. And, since then they've had to change general managers again because their old general manager was involved in some, shady international dealings. So here the Braves are, and they're in first place, surprisingly, and it's due in part to the trades they made. They went out there and they got Mike Foltynewicz, and they got Sean Newcomb, and they got a few other players I mentioned, Dansby Swanson and Ender Enciarte, and, even some of the smaller deals they've made for draft picks have really worked out for them. And so it was a questionable decision when they originally hit reset because it seemed like they were well positioned. And yet here they are, basically all these trades have worked out in their favor. I think you can argue that the Simmons trade was a misstep because of how he's developed offensively. He's went from just an elite defender to a well-rounded player who is arguably one of the best players in baseball because of that. So on the whole, I think you can say, the Braves reset went well, but it's just one of those cases where a team probably started to rebuild before they needed to, and frankly, started to rebuild way before they needed to, and yet they're back in, a competitive mode. And it just goes to show there are a lot of different ways to build a winner. Sometimes it's through rebuilding the right way or the so-called right way, and sometimes, it's by holding on to your core, going for a quicker reset. You look around the league right now, the Yankees hit reset a couple years back, and the time between the beginning of that process and the end was, half a season? In the Braves case, it took a few years, and in other cases, like Cincinnati, it's taken even longer. So there are a lot of different ways to build a winner, and the Braves are, just an example.
What's interesting, though, about the Yankees, let's take Yankees, Houston, and the Red Sox. And if you look at the three of them, they're among the three, record-wise, 3 of the top 4 teams, because Seattle obviously is in that mix, too. The vast majority of the Red Sox lineup is homegrown, that they drafted. The vast majority of the Yankees lineup is homegrown because of the way they drafted. Houston's the same thing. What is it about those organizations where it's perceived that they're buying players? They, when you and I know they can trade for Giancarlo Stanton because they can pay him, and the Red Sox can sign a J.D. Martinez. But the teams that need to draft, like the Pirates, for example, where are they missing where the Red Sox, Yankees, and Astros are hitting, because the vast majority of their lineups came through their system?
That's a great question, and I think part of it's just luck. I know that's kind of a boring answer, but, sometimes you get lucky with player development. And, you point to the Astros. Jose Altuve and Dallas Keuchel were not well regarded as prospects. Altuve was dismissed as being too short. He didn't really walk. He didn't hit for much power, and nobody thought he was going to be, a 330 hitter in the majors. Same with Keuchel.
And I saw him here when he played at Tri-City. I saw him here, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and, you can credit that to the players, their hard work, but a lot of players work hard in the majors and don't, take those kind of leaps. And you can credit to the coaching and development staff. And to be sure, each of these organizations has good coaches, nothing against them. But I think luck really plays a big role in all of this. And, you talk about the Pirates, and for a few years there, it seemed like they had luck on their side. Ray Searage was considered a wizard with what he did with A.J. Burnett and Francisco Liriano and some others. And yet now he's kind of under some fire because you look at what Houston's done with Garrett Cole and Charlie Morton, two former Pirates pitchers. They've seemingly unlocked upside that the Pirates can never get to. So I know it's a boring answer. I know it's not satisfying, but I really do think luck plays a role in this. And, to be fair, the Yankees and, the Red Sox and even the Astros, they have some of the best general managers in baseball. I mean, Brian Cashman, if he's not the best, he's one of the best, and he's proven that throughout his career. And, people do try to dismiss his success because of the payroll, but they never talk about the pressure he's faced and how he had to deal with, let's say a temperamental owner for the first half of his career there. And, he's made a number of great decisions that would have been great decisions no matter where he was. And, yes, it helps that he could absorb Giancarlo Stanton's contract, but he also traded for Didi Gregorius and some of these other players when they weren't on the radar. So, there's two sides to that coin, and while luck certainly plays a role, I think Cashman is without a doubt one of the best talent evaluators, in baseball.
RJ, do you like the route the Phillies are taking? There's a lot of homegrown talent there, too, but they added in veterans like Arrieta and Sanchez.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because the Phillies rebuild didn't look as promising as it does now about a year ago. A number of their youngsters kind of stalled, and, to be fair, they do have some good players who have been overlooked. I mean, Cesar Hernandez, their second baseman, he is an on-base machine. He's all of a sudden hitting for power. He's one of the fastest second basemen in baseball. You're talking about a real well-rounded player there. And, you added Arrieta, you added Santana to a mix that also had Odubel Herrera and some interesting young pitchers. And, it's working out for them. I will say, I don't buy into the Phillies being as competitive this season as I do with the Braves. I might be misreading the situation there, but I think the Phillies probably need another offseason. I assume they're going to chase Manny Machado, Bryce Harper, and whomever else this winter. And if they land one of those, hey, all of a sudden the National League East is getting very, very crowded at the top. But right now I see the Phillies as being, the distant third-place team in that division.
Now, let's take it one step further. The Phillies, of course, would be a team that when people think of analytics, they think of Gabe Kapler and his extensive use and his depth of belief in analytics. You wrote a fascinating article a couple of weeks ago about Kevin Cash and his use of Sergio Romo to start the game. Okay? The closer starts the game. As not a closer, he's an opener. So, I mean, it's something we have to see how it works out, but what was your initial thought when you saw that happen? And now, with a little time to think about it, what do you think?
Well, I guess I have my concerns about it still, and I had a lot of concerns at the time because while I understand that this strategy can, in theory, lead to some advantageous matchups, you're also asking a lot of your starting pitchers who aren't used to either, coming in the game in the second inning or in the first inning when there's runners on base. And I really thought it was just a marginal upgrade at best, a marginal advantage compared to the normal strategy. And, to be fair to the Rays, they've had some more injuries since then. Chris Archer's out. And so I guess I'm just not really a huge fan of it based on what I've seen so far, not just with the results, but, the more I think about the process and, what goes into that. Because, you still have to have talent to pull off any of these strategies. And I think the Rays don't have that talent. Their best performances as of late have come from guys like Blake Snell and Archer, who are traditional starting pitchers, and even Nate Eovaldi. So I'm not the biggest fan of it. I think it can be fine if executed, and it wouldn't surprise me if a better team goes out there and executes this really well, and all of a sudden, you see more teams buy in. For instance, the Dodgers seemingly flirted with the idea last week when they started Scott Alexander. But if you're not doing it for platoon advantage purposes, I don't really know that there is an upside to do it. And for instance, the last two times the Rays have done it, today and I believe it was on Sunday, they followed up a righty with a righty and a lefty with a lefty. And once you start doing that, I just don't think there's any advantage whatsoever, at least not a big enough advantage to actually put your pitchers through the hassle of doing it.
I mean, to me, this is just you and I are just standing in the press box chit-chatting. To me, if I've got a closer, I've got Kimbrel, okay? And I've got 2 on and 1 out in the 7th inning, and I think it's a pivotal moment of the game. To me, that's where you use them, not to start the game with them. That to me is where, like, a closer to me can be anytime. And I'll tell you what I'm really impressed with was something Bruce Bochy did the other night in the 4th inning. Right, he thought he had a chance to break the game open and win, and he pinch hit with Alan Hansen. Now it paid off, but I mean, to me, that's managing.
Yeah, I agree. And you're basically talking about, the idea of leverage, and you want to be able to use your best players, or your best substitutions or what have you, when the game is at its most important moment. And with the opener, you're kind of putting unnecessary pressure on the first inning, and you're sort of locking yourself into things that you can come to regret. I mean, just to use Sergio Romo as an example, he is a pretty good right-on-right reliever. And by using him in the first inning, you're basically ruling out the chance of using him in the 6th or the 7th inning, when the game might be, important, when it might have a situation unfold where, you have a right-handed batter up, you have 2 on, it's a 1-0 game or whatever, and you're trying to preserve that lead. So that's one aspect that I don't think anyone, at least publicly, has really been able to evaluate. And I don't know if the Rays even have an answer for that, or any other team considering this. I think there's a lot of, kind of touch and go with it. And, the Rays have come out and said, we're not sure if we're going to continue to use this strategy. They've already, pivoted once this year on their pitching strategy. At the beginning of the year, they had relievers going multiple innings, and they were trying to basically do a piggyback system. So I think it's all in flux. I don't think they even have all the answers, and I sure don't have all the answers. I just think, looking from my perspective, that it's probably one of those strategies that's not going to catch on in a significant way, because I don't think the advantage is significant.
RJ, absolute pleasure. Probably could talk to you for another hour, but that would bore you to death. So I'm not going to do that till you torture you. Thanks so much. Appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
RJ Anderson from CBSSports.com as we continue on News Radio 1070 WKOK, brought to you by our good friends at Sunbury Motors.